Welcome everyone to our space here at the library in Ludington and to those joining us virtually on Zoom. My name is Robin Seymour. Excuse me, my name is Robin Seymour and I'm the head of adult services here at the library. And we're here tonight for our final presentation of the Cairns and Beacons series. There will be a discussion regarding this presentation next Thursday at 7 p.m., both virtually on Zoom and here at the library again. And we've brought this series together with the help of my colleague Thomas Trahey, who is the head of circulation here at the library, as well as Brooke Portman, who originally has had a connection with the library when she was a dean at West Shore Community College. She has since moved into retirement and now she's in Ann Arbor and she's representing the Abondia Center. And we're just really grateful to be able to collaborate with her and with all of our wonderful presenters throughout this series. So we hope that you will enjoy the presentation tonight and learn a lot. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Brooke Portman.
Thanks, Robin. It is a happy, sad event tonight. It's our last presentation. It's like always, like, okay, I don't have to be somewhere every first Thursday, but I'm going to miss it very much. And I hope you all do too. We hope that you have found the ideas to be interesting, some probably challenging, I'm hoping, and ideas that filled you with some energy for the times ahead. We and the community are deeply grateful to you for taking your time to explore these ideas in a community of others. Certainly in these times, democracy, we all need to keep it going. As always, we are terribly grateful to our funders, who are the Michigan Humanities and the Michigan Arts and Cultural Council. I'm going to do the poem tonight first, just because it felt like the last night needs to be first. You know that they've all circled around achieving things step by step, brick by brick, not fast, not in big steps, but just keeping at it. And I recalled this poem by Marge Piercy as I was trying to think of, okay, how to end the series. And it's a rather wonderful poem. I hope you like it too. It's called To Be of Use. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done over and over. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphors for wine or oil, hoppy vases that held corn are put in museums. But you know, they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real. So I do want to run through the 7 sessions that we've had. just to remember all the work that actually has gone on here and the wonderful people who have been in our midst. First, we started out with thinking our way to a post-pandemic democracy, working with Elizabeth Minnick, who's a philosopher, and she brought to us two concepts about good and evil, that both of them have both people who do extensive evil, people who do intensive evil. And good is the same. There are people who do extensive good and people who do intensive good. And those differences were an intensive is a single person. So a Hitler is a single intensive evil person. A shooter killing 15 people is an intensive evil person. You can find other people, and Richard Dahmer, all kinds of folks. There are single individuals who are evil. In the good, you can have Mother Teresa. You might have a person in your life that has been extremely important to you, who has been very good, or in the community. There are any number of individuals, people who do good in this world. The ones where Minnick is most concerned about and interested in are those who are part of the extensive evil and the extensive good crowd. The extensive evil are people who shrug their shoulders, as I'm about ready to do, and just follow the crowd, follow what the boss does, even if it's not really very good, if it's not helpful, if it's a bad thing to do, as many people did to make the Holocaust work. There are also people who are good in the same way, who think nothing of putting somebody in their home for a while in order for them not to be taken by the Nazis. It is somebody who you might take dinner to every single day or call just to make sure that, that they're still happy, they're still living. So all of us who do good day by day, this is where our theme about brick by brick, step by step, all of us doing that are not getting names for ourselves, but doing good quietly day after day. Those are intensive good. They're just interesting concepts. Our second person was Miriam Laker, who connects with tonight, because that was about reimagining capitalism globally. And that was about guaranteed income. And Give Directly, which is the organization that she is a part of, is here in the United States, but it also serves globally. And Miriam Laker was in Uganda when she came to us about 2 o'clock in the morning there, and zoomed in here. And they have done just amazing research. And that's why we wanted to put them on front end of our series, because there are so many questions about guaranteed income. And even there was chatter earlier tonight about, do people use the money well? And they do. And almost there's every program that says that it's used well. Our third session was Michael Tomasky, Reimagining American Capitalism, an economic system that works for America's poor and America's working poor. Michael Tomasky is the editor for The New Republic, but also the editor for a very innovative small journal called Democracy Journal. Just Google it and you get it. The issue, this last issue, the April issue, was a symposium. And the title of that symposium was, big letters, finally, middle out is here. And Tomasky and others came up with that bottom up, middle out, which the president has used periodically now, but about that we need to fund the middle, not the top, but the middle, and that things will get better going up and going down. One of the people who came to the discussion after Michael's session, I think it was Michael's, and not the next one, but there were two right in a row about economics, sat in our discussion and said, I always thought economics was about numbers. Now I find out it's about people. I did tell Michael Tomasky when I emailed him just a week or so ago about that comment, and he was thrilled. So whoever you are in that series, who said that, he was thrilled. After Michael was Gary Gersel. Gary Gersel was talking about neoliberalism, which is what was happening 40 years ago from 40 years back forward. And that was the trickle-down economic theory. And it didn't quite work. And that was sort of what Gary Gersel was talking about with his analysis, and why then we needed to come up with another system, or need to come up with another system. The fifth session was the Supreme Court, past and present. We had a law professor from Wayne State, Stephen Winter, who put courage and empathy, it seems to me, on the faces and hearts of certain judges and lawyers, and also showed the egotism of others. He's a pretty amazing person. He does not like judges who wear masks, and he does think that some do, and that they make some choices serving their own good and not really the human beings in front of him. Then we went on to the two political parties. The Republicans we dealt with in February, and the Democrats in March. And in February, they were very different, as those who were there, very different programs, because the parties are at a different stage. And so we dealt with, and we asked the chair of the Republican Party in Mason County to present the issues relative to the Republicans in Mason County. She also didn't, want to personally just touch what was happening at the presidential level, because there's no control over that. And so she talked about where the Republican Party was. And it was an interesting both conversation from Sheila Krause-Gunther and from some of the audience members, because the Republican Party itself in Mason County has opposing ideas about what the party is and where it should be going. Paul Pearson from University of California, Berkeley, was the speaker for the Democrats. He and a colleague, Jacob Hacker, for the first 20 years of at least Paul's career. I think Jacob is about 15, 20 years older than he is, but they did work on the Republicans. And then about 5 years ago or so, they decided that they would probably run through what they could talk about with the Republicans and move to the Democrats. And so we had a really interesting analysis of what happened with the last election and how the voting went among the urban Democrats and the rural Democrats. He would not make any prognoses about the coming election. He said he was going to stay mum on that one. So now tonight we have our final presentation where we are back to guaranteed income and talking about that. And I'm pleased to introduce you to Kristin Seefeldt from the University of Michigan, who's presenting tonight's Cairns and Beacons program, Testing Guaranteed Income Ideas right here in Michigan. Let me step back for a moment though, since this isn't Lynn Song, and Lynn Song's name was on the brochure that some of you would have seen. So when we were designing the series, I was still very much a newbie to Ann Arbor, but somehow I learned that not only Ann Arbor City Council had approved a guaranteed income project, but that even better, the City Council representative who did the heavy lifting was a representative from my own ward, and that was Lynn Song. When we talked last fall, Lynn noted that the organization and administration of the program was being carried out by fine faculty at the U of Michigan. She would ask, she said, the lead person to join her for the presentation. Lynn's father, who lives in Texas, became severely ill, and she has gone to be with him. But happily, after doing some sleuthing, because Lynn and I didn't talk about this person's name, I found the person that Lynn Song spoke about, and she is with us here tonight. So let me welcome you really now, Kristin Seefeldt. Kristin earned her PhD in public policy and sociology from the University of Michigan. As you know, since she's still there, she continues as an associate professor of social work. Kristin is also the associate director of Poverty Solutions. where the purpose is to develop and test new ways to alleviate poverty. And Arbor's Guaranteed Income Program has been named Guaranteed Income to Grow. A few minutes ago, I told Kristin I loved this title because it's gig. And in fact, it is designed for low-income entrepreneurs and other business people. Name is perfect. Guaranteed Income to Grow, gig. What I find fascinating, and I suspect Kristin will share more details about tonight's program, is that it is designed with a test group. What's that mean? 100 people participating are indeed receiving income on a monthly basis, and records will be kept on the progress that they make. But there is also another 100 people who will be participating in growing their businesses under the program, but they will not be receiving funding from the program. I've never heard of a test like this in a guaranteed income program. It's fascinating. How will the results of improving as business owners compare between the two groups? No, it's a fascinating real-world research study in my mind. Like other scholars we have been honored to present through this series, you will observe that through her daily work, and I have looked into some of her daily work, so this is why I say this. Kristin is changing the world one step at a time. Please help me welcome Kristin Seefeldt to discuss Guaranteed Income to Grow, or GIG. Kristin, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it. I have some slides to sort of guide myself through this presentation, so I'll just go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Yeah, so I'm going to mainly focus my remarks on the Guaranteed Income to Grow pilot, or GIG A2 as we're calling it. I thought what I would do is just start off with a few definitions, a little bit of history, and some of the debates around guaranteed income. I know some of you at least have already talked about guaranteed income, but I do just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And then I'll talk a little bit about the pilot itself. I'll talk about the planning of it, the launch of it. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the research and then some of the next steps. I've built in a couple of places during the presentation to field any questions or clarify anything that's that might be unclear. I've basically been on Zoom all day, so I apologize in advance if anything slightly unclear comes out of my mouth. But I do want to talk a little bit, when I talk about the pilot itself and our experience operating it, I might get into the weeds a little bit, but I think there are some really important implications for what we've experienced and what our participants have experienced if we think about what it would take to make something like guaranteed income, either a state or a national policy, broadening out beyond just a one city pilot. So that's my plan. All right, again, just to get us all on the same page, when we're talking about guaranteed income, what does that mean? We define it as unconditional, no strings attached, regular payments. So unlike some of our social welfare programs, like the food stamp program, or SNAP as it's now called, if you receive that benefit, you can only purchase food. We have a cash assistance program, the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families program, where people are getting the equivalent of cash, but that program has extremely stringent eligibility and work requirements attached to it. It's only used by about a quarter of all eligible families now because it is such a difficult program to access. So guaranteed income is the idea is supposed to be, we trust you to do what you want to do with this money, and we aren't going to place a whole lot of restrictions on it. Also, guaranteed income, at least in the United States context, is really directed toward a specific population. So folks with low income, maybe people who are returning from incarceration. That is in contrast to universal basic income, or UBI, which is really for everybody. And a lot of times these terms get used interchangeably. I think even in our city, a lot of people are referring to the program here as a UBI, but it's really guaranteed income because it is directed toward a very specific population. You know, not all residents of Ann Arbor are eligible for it. Guaranteed income also sometimes is called basic income. But that we'll focus on guaranteed income and not UBI. Guaranteed income is not a new idea, at least dating back to the 18th century, probably earlier. There were political philosophers who talked about the need for sort of a stable amount of income for everybody. Martin Luther King, the Black Panther Party, James Bogg, a labor activist from Detroit, were all proponents of guaranteed income. Interestingly enough, the Nixon administration proposed a guaranteed income program, calling it, referring to it instead as a negative income tax. So instead of paying taxes, you receive a refund, but it really was a guaranteed income program. It did not operate. And then presidential candidate Andrew Yang ran on a platform that called for freedom dividends, which would have been more of a UBI, or a universal basic income. And there's a way to look at some of the COVID relief funds that many folks got, the ones that we refer to shorthand as stimulus payments, as a form of guaranteed income. They were unrestricted in their use. They were given to people in order to keep us afloat during the pandemic. So why would we want to have guaranteed income, as opposed to some other kind of program? As I mentioned before, it really gives people flexibility. They aren't wedded to, having to use it to buy food or having to pay rent with it. If I need to pay a certain bill one month, I can use my guaranteed income to do that. If I have a different expense another month, I can use it for that. At a more, conceptual level, people talk about how having a guaranteed income might allow folks to take risks, and risks that we might think are good ones, like maybe changing a job or going to school or spending time innovating. It also might provide people with more free time, and this could be particularly important for people who maybe are cobbling together multiple jobs in order to keep themselves and their family afloat. We could also see guaranteed income as a way to promote greater income equality in this country that has a pretty wide gap between those who have the least and those who have the most. And also because there's a strong correlation with wealth and race in this country, we could see this also as a way to promote greater racial equity. And finally, more recently, people have started talking about we may need a guaranteed income in our future, given changes that we're seeing in the labor market. Is artificial intelligence going to take away a lot of jobs for folks? And are we going to need to figure out some other way, to keep ourselves supported? So that's another angle through which guaranteed income enters sort of policy debates. Guaranteed income is not without its critics. One of the leading objections to guaranteed income is that what it will do is cause people to reduce their work hours or not work at all. And, that would be bad for our economy, or we would be supporting, people who were sitting on the couch. No evidence of that. Others worry about that people will spend their money irresponsibly. The data that we have thus far about how people spend their money shows that it's mostly going toward meeting basic needs. But there is still that concern. I would argue that in this country, we also sort of have trouble thinking about, giving people money for, money for nothing. That often in our program, we expect people to be doing something in return. And that has a lot to do with some of the deservingness narratives that run through a lot of our social welfare programs. And the numbers front, there's a concern that it would just cost too much, right? Like, it's making out cash payments, on some regular basis to people. And, particularly for those who are concerned about the growing federal debt, that brings really true as a concern. And then also there's the concern that it could lead to high inflation. And people will point to the COVID relief funds, the stimulus payments, as evidence that giving people a lot of cash leads to inflation. I think there's a lot of other factors that were tied into it, but in some of the analyses I've read, yeah, the COVID relief money did play some role in pushing inflation up, right? So when people have more money to spend, there's a greater demand for goods, and that pushes prices up. COVID relief payments, though, were not the sole cause of inflation that we've seen recently. So right now, there are more than 100 guaranteed income pilots that are operating, that are in the planning stages, or that have concluded. And if you are interested in learning more about those, there is a coalition of mayors for a guaranteed income, where you can learn all about the various pilots. Originally, most of these pilots were funded with philanthropic dollars, from private foundations. Increasingly, though, pilots, including the one in Ann Arbor, are funded with COVID relief dollars. And, I'll put a pin in that because that raises some interesting issues. The University of Pennsylvania Center for Guaranteed Income Research has sort of been on the forefront of doing the evaluations of these pilots. And they've been a really useful partner to us as we've undertook our pilot in Ann Arbor. And these pilots do all sorts of different things, from serving people in a particular low-income neighborhood, families with very young children, returning citizens. There's several pilots that are focused on artists. So each pilot has its own kind of unique spin to it. And again, the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income pilot website could give you more information on that. So what do we know about the effectiveness of providing a guaranteed income payment? Back in the 70s, around the time that the Nixon administration was getting its negative income tax proposal together, there were a whole series of experiments around the country that piloted this concept. And what they found overall is that there were a reduction in hours worked. And that kind of became the main headline. And then people got nervous about guaranteed income. However, if you unpacked this analysis a little bit more, most of the reduction in work was reduction of a second adult or young adult in the household. So it allowed, maybe in a two-parent household, it allowed one parent to maybe work less. And we might think that that could be a good thing for the family, if we think that parents being able to spend time with kids is a good thing. But that kind of nuance got lost in the headlines. One experiment within the NIT experiments did find positive effects on children's test scores from guaranteed income. More currently, the pilot that's operating in Stockton, California, which was sort of the first big guaranteed income pilot in this country, actually found that initially employment levels increased, over the first year of the guaranteed income pilot. That didn't hold out, but the pilot was also operating kind of during the height of COVID. So it becomes a little bit trickier to understand the effects. It's also shown improved health and mental health outcomes for some of the participants. But looking across like a large number of guaranteed income experiments, both in the US and elsewhere in the world, a pretty recent review, said like we can find some positive effects, improved health, improved food security, higher rates of employment, but no long-term effectiveness has been demonstrated. So these are all pilots where at some point payments ended, and these positive effects were not sustained. Also pointed out that even though we have, this huge number of pilots operating in the United States, we don't have a lot of evidence from them yet. The evidence is still in process. It takes a while, if you want to see like what happens after a year of getting a guaranteed income payment, you have to wait. So I expect that we will have a lot of evidence coming in soon, but we don't have it yet. There have been, though, a lot of the pilots have a interview or qualitative component to them, and so I just pulled, some quotes, that sort of are representative of some of the findings that these studies have uncovered. The first from the Los Angeles participant who says, I'm less overwhelmed now. I can help, with my son's therapy. I can afford that. The Chicago participant, talks about how this gives this person the opportunity to actually get more schooling, get more education, to achieve their future goals. And in a program in Mississippi had a different sort of model. They kind of created a cohort among the participants, and that was very important. But the money also allowed people to like do some very meaningful things with their lives. So I'm going to pause at this point and see if there are any questions or clarifications that folks want to raise.
No questions so far.
All right, great. Then I will continue on. Thank you. All right, so let me pivot now to talking about the pilot in Ann Arbor in particular, the Guaranteed Income to Grow Ann Arbor. And this is just a snapshot from our website, which is giga2.org. You can learn more about the program there as well. So just back up and give a little bit of background of how this came to be, and try to maybe talk a little bit about what I imagine Lynn Song would have highlighted if she were able to be here today. So like many places around the country, Ann Arbor received a large allotment of COVID relief money through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA as we often call it. So that's a good amount of money. And the city first decided to survey residents to sort of see what, as an Ann Arbor resident, I took this survey, just to see what our funding priorities were. So this happened in early 2022, and there were a long list of sort of ideas for using the money that you could check off and rank. UBI, or Universal Basic Income, was on the list, and about a half of people who completed the survey said that that would be a good thing to invest in. On the other hand, in the list of priorities, providing services to people who are unhoused, water pipe replacement, instituting an unarmed response team, and several others were much more highly ranked. So, guaranteed income, yes, people thought it was important, but it wasn't necessarily one of the highest priority items on people's wish lists. So the city then provisionally allocated $1.6 million to, I'll call it guaranteed income. At the last minute, that funding was nearly reallocated to road repair, but I credit Lynn Song and really a lot of community support, kind of push back on city council, kind of at the last minute changing that, and the funding remained intact. So the city then subsequently released a call for proposals to administer and evaluate the guaranteed income program. And that came out in the fall of 2023. A number of us at the University of Michigan, and I'll show our team in a moment, we were awarded the contract in the spring of 2023. Although the city council put one provision in there. Originally, we had proposed that this be a county-wide program. The city council restricted the program to only residents of the city of Ann Arbor. We get our contract approved in the summer of 2023. So why do I have these dates down? Why would you necessarily care? Well, all of the COVID relief dollars expire at the end of 2026, so they have to be spent. So, we don't have, and we're supposed to do a 2-year guaranteed income pilot with research. So we've been on a really tight timeline. And that's been fun and adventurous. But we are committed to making this work. But there's been some hurdles to clear over time. This is our research team. I don't know that you really need to see our lovely faces, but we're a mix of people from the policy school, from public health, from the School of Social Work, and we bring various backgrounds to this work. We also have a lot of different partners in this project, and one of our main partners is an organization called Steady. So they're a fintech, a financial firm. They actually were co-founded by Shaquille O'Neal. Interesting factoid, but Steady has worked with many guaranteed income pilots to help actually get the money to individuals. And this is important because, as it turns out, the University of Michigan is not all that good at, they're really good at paying people who are employed, but there's not a lot of good mechanisms in the university to make these kind of regular payments. So we work with Steady and use their platform to get people paid. We also could not undertake this effort without a whole host of partners. And these are organizations that gave us input on how to design and administer the program. The Ann Arbor District Library gave us space so that we could have student research assistants sitting there at every hour the library was open to be able to answer residents' questions and to help people apply once we opened up the applications. And that was just really key to have this centrally located, spot where people could come, and we're still kind of using the various libraries in Ann Arbor as meeting points for people. And the more we go, the longer we're kind of in operation, the more partners that we add, including now the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, who has provided us with some funding to actually give some payments to people who otherwise wouldn't be paid. But I'll talk a little bit about that more later on. So I mentioned before, in talking about all the pilots that operate around the country, that most of them or all of them really have a specific focus, a population that they're looking to serve. We propose that we would focus on low and moderate income entrepreneurs. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is that for many folks with lower income, entrepreneurship, and by entrepreneurship, I mean, doing a kind of business activity of any sort. It doesn't have to be, that you own a brick and mortar store and, you're a small business. But any kind of economic activity can often provide opportunity to people for whom, like, the traditional labor market isn't working, and people who have criminal a criminal record are one of those groups. It also can provide extra income for people who work low paying and unstable jobs. A big reason we focused on this group, though, is a lot of our community partners suggested this, that this might be a group of people in the city of Ann Arbor who could really benefit from a guaranteed income. The city also said repeatedly that they wanted a novel research question, which we then interpreted as like we needed to do something different than other pilots were already doing, that they didn't want to replicate what some other city had done, that they wanted something new. And to the extent that these are COVID relief dollars that are funding the project, we know that COVID really, undermined a lot of businesses, particularly smaller businesses, and businesses owned by BIPOC folks. We also know, too, that given the precarity of low-paying work, that a lot of people are doing work on the side just to pay their bills. So this is the group that we decided would be our focus population. Although I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually meant in practice. Again, because these are federal dollars, we had to specify what we meant by low or moderate income, and with the city, we landed on income at or below 225% of the federal poverty line, or just over twice the federal poverty line, which roughly corresponds to about $56,000 a year of income for a family of three. So the poverty threshold varies by household size. We use that. So I mentioned before that, a lot of the early efforts around guaranteed income were funded by philanthropic dollars. These are federal dollars. These are federal dollars that get audited, and this particular pot of federal dollars get audited a lot. So there's extra scrutiny. And also, we take very seriously that this is public dollars, and we need to be good stewards of those dollars. So we want to make sure that we are providing guaranteed income to the people who, qualify for it based on the eligibility criteria that we set out and the city set out. On the other hand, we really didn't want to turn into a public welfare bureaucracy. We didn't want to put undue burden on people when, to prove that they were eligible for the program. So that is a line we had to walk, and one that was really tricky to navigate, and something to think about too, if this is something to be expanded. So, in its current iteration, a lot of the advocates of guaranteed income talk about guaranteed income as providing people with dignity, because you're not telling them what to do with the money. On the other hand, if it's going to be a public program, there's a lot of, there's accountability for spending those dollars comes in. So that becomes a real challenging tension point, and one we certainly experienced. All right, so those are the broad parameters of Gig A2. Before I talk a little bit more about what we've actually done and the research, I'll just pause again to see if there are questions.
Any questions here? Kristin, can I just ask you, you said that almost all of the guaranteed income programs are pilot programs. Are they
Yes.
all pilot programs, or are there any that are set up to last permanently?
So the only one, none of the pilots are set up to last permanently. And that's really a huge challenge. And it's particularly a challenge for those that, like Ann Arbor's, that are funded with ARPA, because there is no plan for what happens next. And that's something we've been trying to communicate to participants since the day we signed them up. The one exception, and it's not a pilot, but Alaska's permanent fund, which is the oil revenue dollars that get distributed to citizens of the state of Alaska. I mean, that is in effect a guaranteed income pilot program, and that has been going on for a long time. But securing additional funding, I think, as these pilots start to end, is going to become a real challenge, especially, also because a lot of the studies, and ours right now too, although we hope we can get funding to do this, are not tracking people after it ends, like to see what happens next. And I think that's something we would hope to do, because, we're worried about it.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah, and we have another one.
What do you consider entrepreneurship?
Great.
Or is that coming up?
That is the broadest definition that you could imagine it could be. So it could be anything from someone who is has a small business, maybe, they have a lawn care business, or they're a cleaning service, and maybe they're incorporated, all the way to the person who provides childcare occasionally, for friends for pay, or does nails or hair, maybe occasionally sells things through some platform like Etsy. We also, when people were applying, we didn't make them prove that they were entrepreneurs. So we didn't want it to be a sticking point. So we are trusting people to say, this is the business activity I do, even if I do it very irregularly. But it encompasses all of those things. And also gig workers. I should have mentioned the gig workers as well. So if you drive for Uber or do DoorDash delivery, or something through all those other platforms that are out there.
Like an adjunct professor or something like that. Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it for questions right now.
I have one. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What I was wondering is I come out of the arts, so a gig might mean that this is a tuba player, or might be a singer at a bar. So
Yep.
that's all good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And we had some great connections to at least some parts of the art community in Ann Arbor, and we definitely have a couple of artists in our participants. You know, we also, as we've gotten to know people a little bit more, we've also found that like a lot of these folks are doing multiple things, right? Like maybe you are the tuba player, but you also are, braiding hair, and, you're trying to start up a music lesson business. So people are doing a lot of different things all together, packaged together.
And I have another question sort of related to that, or actually just even the whole program. Is there training, or are there any consultants that the 100 folks or the 200 folks can go to get advice and to help improve their business?
Yeah, we've provided everyone with a list of resources, which includes, and I'm going to forget the name of it. There's an entrepreneurial center that's part of Washtenaw Community College. So we've made people aware of that. We didn't, in order to make this a test of guaranteed income, we decided not to attach a lot of different services to it in a very deliberate way, but we wanted to make people aware that they existed. And that actually anyone who would go to our website would have seen that list of services too.
Okay, so now I get exactly, you are really trying to test just the fact of cash, period.
Just the fact of cash. Yeah.
No other assistance, it's just cash. Interesting.
It's cash. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Okay. So said we've been operating on a tight timeline. We hit the ground running. We were out in the community meeting with different organizations in late summer, early fall to try to get the word out. That this guaranteed income pilot was coming. We had news releases. We had I attended lots of meetings of different organizations, and asked people to use their networks. So a lot of word of mouth. We opened the applications, and they were online applications from October 2nd to October 13th. We were given really strong advice from the folks at University of Pennsylvania who have run many of these programs to not have a really overly long application window, because in the end, it's just that many more people who don't get the payment and that much more disappointment. So, their advice was do a really good job on the outreach, and then, have the application open, for a couple of weeks. We started enrolling people in like late October, early November. And again, and Brooke mentioned this in the introduction, we selected, and it was a stratified random sample selection. So we randomly selected people that in a way that represented some demographic characteristics of people who applied. So I'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. So 100 people get the payment, which is $528 a month. And another 100 people are sort of the comparison group. We are now, though, paying these folks $25 a month, just as a way to acknowledge that they are making a huge contribution to this study. So it will be comparing a guaranteed income of $528 to a guaranteed income of $25 a month, which, I think seems reasonable. And again, these are folks who are making an important contribution by agreeing to be in the research study. So we issued our first payments in January, and Everybody gets paid on the 15th of every month, except if that's a weekend or a holiday. Most people have their funds direct deposited into their bank accounts. Other people have a reloadable debit card. Again, I mentioned we had during the application period, we were at our public library, and even on weekends, we had email and phone lines set up that we still do, because people email and call with various questions. And we did take applications during the entire period. One misconception that we had worked really hard to sort of correct was that it was a first come, first serve. Because it was clear that people were getting anxious about like getting their application in right away. And we're like, no, you have this 2-week period. It's not, putting it in now versus tomorrow is not a deal breaker. So we got over 1,000 applications. And then we had to like figure out who was eligible and who wasn't. And about half weren't eligible. So about half of folks didn't live in Ann Arbor. I mean, we had applications from New Mexico and, all other places around the country. Even though it was an Ann Arbor program, I think, there are lots of people who need money. And I think, why not take a chance? We also, had a set of folks who like have Ann Arbor mailing addresses, but don't actually live in the city limits. And that was I think a challenging issue to explain to people. And, all we could really say is like, this is what city council decided to do with their money. And then we had, we did have some applications that were clearly forged documents, for lack of a better term. And, most of them were pretty easy to suss out. But, that is, I am not someone who, as someone who's done a lot of research about the public welfare system, I am not someone who gets worked up about fraud and abuse because it is small. But it was there, and anytime you set up a system, some people are going to try to figure out how to work it. And, that's just the reality of it. So we ended up with about 500 people who met the eligibility criteria. So these are preliminary data. So, but this is, just kind of who's in the program, and I've got it broken down by people who get the payment, and then people who are in the control group, the research group, who get the $25 amount. And those are very preliminary. We haven't finished cleaning the data yet. But they're basically, as we had hoped they would be, they're basically similar. And that's what you want. You want to be able to say that, people getting the payment are very similar to people who aren't getting the payment, so that when you see any differences over time in any kind of outcome, you can attribute it to the guaranteed income and not something else, about folks, so, and in terms of race and ethnicity and education level, these proportions are reflective of what the overall applicant pool looked like. So 39% of people who applied identified as being Black or African American, 41% identified as being white, and 20% as other. So that exactly reflects the racial ethnic breakdown of the applicant pool. So what did we find through all of this? We really, we didn't have enough time. There was, very little time to ramp this up, very little time. I really, to this day, wish we had we're able to have done just so much more community outreach and community engagement. But if we were going to get all the payments out and get the research done before the funds expired, then, we had to be on this tight timetable. I mentioned the geography and the Ann Arbor residency. The other issue that every pilot has to deal with is what is the effect of getting a guaranteed income payment on any other public benefits that people might receive? Because typically it would be, if you get this cash, that reduces like your food stamp benefit or other benefits. We were able to get an agreement with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to not count guaranteed income payments against any benefits they administer, as well as the Ann Arbor Housing Commission will not count this payment against like the rent that people pay if they live in one of those. That has been huge. But not all pilots are able to negotiate that. And that often means that the actual payment becomes a lot less than what it should be. And it's something to think about. Again, if we were going to scale this up nationwide, we'd have to restructure a lot of other programs and how they treat, income, if we were really going to make this effective. Setting the eligibility criteria and then trying to figure out what documentation we could use without being too burdensome and without making this seem like it was just another welfare program. Again, that was a line we had to walk. We were really well connected to lots of social service agencies in Ann Arbor, and we're able to do lots of outreach through them. But we're not convinced we reached everybody who, people who aren't connected to those organizations. And that's just a hard group to try to reach. $1.6 million sounded like a lot of money to me. I'm not someone who's been on, large grant projects before, but it really is a very, once you start figuring out where all the money is going, it ends up not being a lot. All I'll say about the bureaucracies is I have learned more about the inner workings of the University of Michigan than I ever wanted to. As well as the city of Ann Arbor. And, but it was really, again, when we think about doing these, it sounds simple, let's just pay people. It's just not simple. There are all other, bureaucracies, rules and structures in place. And as much as we tried to think of all of the potential challenges in advance, we just couldn't. And so things would come up. We do think, though, that we provided really great customer services. Most of our student research assistants were social work students who really, I think, were a great sort of public face of the program. And, we heard back from people who were applying just how helpful folks had been. We had great community partners. We're now connected with other guaranteed income pilots. And, the University of Michigan, has a great reputation, but it also doesn't have a great reputation in the city. It doesn't pay taxes and it takes up a lot of land. So it felt good to be able to be doing something positive for the community. So I'll just end by kind of going through just the research, which is very much in progress. So, we are using this randomized control model with mixed methods, which, means comparing, outcomes for people who get the money versus those who get the $25 a month. And what we're focused on learning is, does getting this payment help small businesses and entrepreneurs stabilize or grow their businesses? Or does it allow people to step back and focus on other things? Like, does it allow people to say, like, I don't want to do this anymore. What I really want to do is go to school. And then, like most of the pilots around the country, we're also looking at, does it improve people's health? Does it improve housing, food security, transportation security, physical, mental health, access to care, quality child care, things like that. So, and I think I've more or less, gone out over this earlier, but again, like this is a way for us to be able to say, like, if there's a difference, if people who get the money report that they have more food security than people who don't, we can say, using this design, that that's an effect of the guaranteed income payment and not something else. And it is considered the gold standard. And it's also, considered fair in the sense that, like, we're not handpicking who gets the benefit, and no one group benefits more than another. It was done randomly. People completed surveys at the beginning of the pilot. They will do another survey at the year 1 mark, and they'll do another survey when the pilot ends after 2 years of getting payments, and they get an additional $50 payment for every survey they complete. And then this summer, we're going to be doing starting in-depth interviews with a smaller number of participants to really, like, talk to them about, like, what does this payment mean for your money? What does it mean for your business? Just learn more about how it works in their budgets and how it works in their daily lives. So, stay tuned. While we don't have any of those findings yet, we will be distributing them, as they come out. So I'll conclude with that, and thanks for your attention.
Do we have any questions?
Where would I have heard either on NPR or it was in the Atlantic magazine, because I listened to some of that really went into a lot of detail, and maybe it was talking about the Uganda study as well, and actually had some insight as to what happens when the payments stop. That must have been on NPR, was it? I mean, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, NPR has been doing a lot of different stories about guaranteed income over the course of the last year. So maybe that's it. That's not what I caught. So thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Okay.
But you got somewhere Uganda or another country in Africa?
Possibly. And
okay.
I don't remember for sure, but that's kind of what piqued my interest to come tonight, is because I have been hearing, I've listened to some of this elsewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to some folks in Kalamazoo who were interested in maybe starting a pilot. Detroit may or may not. It's hard to tell. So there, a lot of cities have a lot of federal funding that they need to spend by 2026. So this is becoming a popular way to do that.
How do you not risk becoming another bureaucracy?
Oh, great question. And that has been something at the forefront of our collective mind since the get-go. So a couple things that we tried to do. First, in terms of when people applied, we tried to have a big range of things that people could use to sort of as proof of, say, their income or their residency. So we had a lot of different types of verification documents that people could use. We allowed people to take pictures of their public assistance cards as a way of proving that they're low income, and just upload that. So we tried to be flexible about that. The other thing we did that I think is pretty different than a public welfare bureaucracy is that once we got someone's application, if it was incomplete in any way, or they had, not, something they had uploaded wasn't quite giving us the information we needed, we would call them or email them right back and work with them to try to like make sure they could get some documentation that would satisfy the auditing requirements. And that, at least my experience with, a lot of public welfare bureaucracies is like, if you don't, if your application's incomplete, like no one's like telling you it's incomplete and helping you make it complete. We also, and I think this is something I think, again, our students were really bought into, is that we would be as responsive as possible so that, emails and phone calls would get returned as soon as possible. That might even be 10 minutes later. And we got a lot of feedback that like, I can't believe someone returned my call right away. When I call my caseworker, and caseworkers are overworked. Let me be very clear about that. But, it's like, I can't ever reach her and her voicemail's full. So we tried to really be cognizant that, that people may have had bad experiences, and let's not replicate that.
But that is within the U of M umbrella, that you would have students working.
Yeah.
Or doing a follow-up and giving resources.
Mhm.
Where you don't have U of M in the center of your city. I guess my concern would be then you're going to utilize workers to do just that.
Yeah, and that is something I have concerns about. Like, again, like if this goes large scale, how do we not turn it into just another social welfare program? I'm not convinced that that wouldn't happen. And I'm actually writing about this right now, that like I think this is a conversation people in the guaranteed income pilot space need to be taken a little bit more seriously. And I think we could, have really productive conversations about like, what could we reimagine the whole public welfare bureaucracy writ large. But if we don't, I'm not convinced yet that we wouldn't just end up making it another social welfare program. So I think, a message we're trying to communicate is like how important this customer service is, and why it matters. But yeah, adding this as another program to caseworkers who already have too much to do is, that's not necessarily useful.
So that's one argument for universal basic income, is that there's no bureaucracy involved at all.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's, we have an earned income tax credit for people who work low paid jobs that's administered through the IRS. And that is, yes, it's the IRS, but it is still a lot more efficient than a social service agency is, and a lot less intrusive in many regards. So if it were, there probably is a way we could do it through the tax system. I mean, that's how we did it with the COVID relief dollars. We were involved in efforts to try to get people who don't typically file taxes to file taxes so they could get COVID relief. So that, you can reach people who don't necessarily always file for taxes. So that, that is another possible mechanism.
Give them enough basic income, then do away with food stamps and do away with everything else, and that gets rid of a whole lot. I mean,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that's been an idea that has had, at least in the past, has had support from, some more libertarian leaning folks, right? And which is sort of an interesting marriage, because a lot of, guaranteed income folks are perceived to be quite far left. But, that is the amount of money we spend on administering programs is, is not inconsequential. But I think of it as like, as a country, somehow we've decided that that's important to do that because we worry as a country so much about fraud, and keeping fraud at bay. Our experience in Ann Arbor has been, yes, people may try to use a program they're not eligible for, but it's not really a huge problem, and it can be dealt with.
So as ARPA funds dry up, that would seem to be a once in a lifetime opportunity right there. Do you have any optimism that something like this can continue?
There are very dedicated people who are really focused on the advocacy part of this, and that includes researchers. It includes one of the groups that is really involved in this. I'm going to blank on their name, but they're a smaller scale version of Give Directly. So I think there's momentum building, and I think that the hope of folks in the advocacy arm of this is that we will get some more findings real soon, and hopefully those findings, I think from their perspective, will support the idea of like why guaranteed income is important. But my optimism, my level of optimism, varies with the weather often. So we'll see. There's going to be a big guaranteed income conference in Detroit in June. Sort of bringing together researchers, advocates, others, and part of what they're trying to do is like plan out a policy change strategy.
That's encouraging. That's very encouraging. Yeah.
I want to make a note, and I've just texted Thomas that I know in the past I've read something about this. 1 month after the money stops, 6 months after the money stops, a year after the money stops, 5 years. And that the research was saying there, but I got to go find it, that it affected people. It had a positive effect for a very long time. So it's not unquestionable to me about every parent wants to treat their kids well. Just because it's poor doesn't mean that they're going to buy stuff for themselves.
Right. And just because someone has low income doesn't mean that their child shouldn't have a birthday cake. That's
absolutely. Or candy bar from week to week, I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
This has been fascinating. I mean,
yeah.
Really appreciate the information you have, Kristin.
Yeah, I'm very excited to start like doing some interviews with people this summer. Anecdotally, with a few people we've been in communication with, they've talked about like how some people have used the money to like buy something that they needed for their businesses, and others have used it because they need to make a car repair that they putting off because they didn't have the money. And so, we are starting, at least to hear a little bit about, what this all means for people.
Good. Your report has to be done by 2026. So with this part of this program, you can't follow up 2 years later and see what effect it's had. Or
we certainly could. We designed the study to leave open that possibility. And, you know, we just don't have currently have the funds to pay for research assistance, pay for the, you know, incentive payments that I believe are so important. You know, when you're asking people to spend an hour of time taking a survey, but that's, you know, that's something we can do. We just, you know, I think we're finally at a point where we're taking a bit of a breath now after the whirlwind that was the guaranteed income launch. You know, so that we can start thinking about where, you know, where we could apply for some money to do that.
I also just wanted to give some feedback about, it's really nice to see the folks who are involved in this, their pictures.
Oh,
Yeah, keep those in all the time.
okay. We're a good team.
Good. Guys, you
Yeah,
know,
and I will give another shout out to the 23 grad students who worked with us, and they
Yeah.
were amazing.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you for the information. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all the work that you're doing on this.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me and wanting to learn a little bit more about Gig A2.
thank you very much.